Welcome to the channel. Today you'll be using primary yellow light, madder lake, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, titanium white, and a drying medium made by Cobra. All of these are water mixable oils produced by Royal Talents, the Cobra professional line. We're going to begin by making a dark mixture with the madder lake and ultramarine blue to do a sketch in, and this is a number two round. We begin by sketching out the large masses. This is not a time to get bogged down in detail. You may want to do a quick pencil sketch before you go right into the painting, or you can start like I do, just right on the canvas, knowing that you can always wipe out or ignore certain lines that you put in at this stage. The composition for this work is going to be basically an O pattern, where the primary center interest is going to be in the very middle of the painting, in which I will take you to various points of interest in a sort of an O pattern. And to do that, we're going to have a section of trees here in this darker spot to the right, and also over there to the left, as well as one pretty center right here on the bottom, and then we're going to have one located near the top of the landmass. There we go. I named this particular video 5 Keys to Landscape Painting. One, for the first key, is that as you do the sketch in, concentrate just on the big shapes and the composition. Like I just did, pick out a particular composition pattern that you will believe will enhance the telling of the story. There are various compositions that you can use. I would direct you to read Edgar Payne's wonderful book on outdoor painting and composition. And there you can look up the more information about various compositions and the O composition that I'm using in this particular painting today. As you can see, these are just some big shapes. And part of this is a big mass, if you will, of landscape that we're doing today, with about 2/3 of the painting going to be consisting of the land masses, and only about 1/3 is going to be reserved for the sky. Taking some titanium white now, and I'm going to mix the sky color. Sometimes, especially like a painting like this, sometimes it helps to work your way down the painting from top to bottom. So I mix in just a little bit of ultramarine blue, and then also some Cobra quick dry medium. Now I just begin. This is a number 8 hog bristle brush, so I can cover as much ground as possible. This painting surface today is an 11 by 14. As I described to you before, I like to leave a little sections of the underpainting, which is transparent red oxide once more, and I've done that previously and let it completely dry before using it for this painting. There are sections I'm going to leave alone and then use a dry brush technique when I actually blend the two different types of blues or other colors together. Here I want to make sure that I'm going across the horizon line, which is that top purple line that you see. And this is where the sky color is going to be the lightest. Here you notice that most of the time when you look at the sky, there'll be one section of the sky that's going to be a little bit darker than the other side. And this also provides visual excitement. It breaks up the mass of colors. And so that's what I'm putting there. And now I'm going back into that darker mass with some titanium white to produce a lighter blue, which will be basically the rest of the sky color that I'll be working with. This goes along with that first key again, is that the key to the larger shapes is also making sure that we cover the canvas before we really get started into any detail. And now notice I'm taking that now and beginning to blend those two colors in, creating a little bit of variety as I go. Painting today on the French easel. French easels are wonderful for small studios as well as being able to take them outdoors. And while I've used lighter outdoor rigs, I have to admit that it's really hard to beat the French easel in its versatility. French easels are very stable outdoors as well as in the studio. You can do all kinds of sizes. And so, if you are looking to invest in your first easel, then I would certainly recommend starting with a good French easel. By good French easel, I mean you need to spend about $200. A Julian easel, there's certain kinds of Julian easels that will work well. This one is my favorite and one I would particularly recommend, and that is a Maybeth full box easel or a half box easel. I find the full box easel, for the added maybe 2 pounds to the setup, is worth it for the space. And the drawers are sufficient to carry small tubes of paint without adding too much weight, along with your paint brushes and your medium. And then you might need a side bag to carry your paper towels or other instruments that don't fit into the drawers of the French easel. You can even buy a strap, I believe, to put this on your back. It does have a handle that you can carry. I find that most of the time I'm actually painting not very far from the car, and so the weight doesn't bother me. All right, so now we got the sky in. We're going to begin with the far hill, painting in the greens. This is a green mixture, of course, of primary yellow light, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and then also a little bit of titanium white to push the color saturation back a little bit, as well as the temperature. The temperature, of course, if there's more blue added, that is cool. So that's how you define the temperature. Really is by two colors on your palette, which is blue, makes it the color temperature cool, and then of course yellow will make the color temperature warmer, or red. Same difference. I use a minimum palette, as you can notice, just one of each of the primaries, plus burnt umber to help bring down the saturation level and to gray some of the mixtures if needed, and then titanium white. Here I'm just varying my brush strokes as I begin filling in the painting. And in this particular painting, I'm basically starting from the top and going all the way down to the bottom. Now, there are other times, which I've even mentioned in the videos, that you may want to start with all of your darks first to judge color and then go to the lights last. But you don't always have to do that. I did set up the darks in terms of my sketch, and so technically I did start with the darks. Some other artists I know start with very darks, and then they also want to put in their lightest color, which is usually in the sky, so that way they know that all the other tones have to be in between those two. Of course, key number 2 in landscape painting I want to talk to you today about is the value. Value is simply a comparison from one color to the next. It's easiest to see on your palette as you're mixing. When you're able to start with your green puddle of color, you can mix the other tonal values right within the center of it to judge from the first mixture whether it's lighter or darker. And of course, as you're moving forward, one of the easiest ways to realize is you're going to use less titanium white. In fact, perhaps no titanium white in any of those mixtures. You're going to be concentrating on different amounts of your primary colors in the mixtures and getting more saturated color and less grayed down color as you move forward towards the foreground of your painting. So you notice this particular green color that we've now shifted to is very similar to the mixture that's in the far hill. The only addition has been a little bit more ultramarine blue. It still looks relatively cold because it doesn't have much yellow in it or red. Yellow and red tend to drop out as you get further and further away in the distance. So key number 2 is just making sure that as you get the initial lay-in, that you're getting relatively close to the different tonal values that you wanted to set up to enable you to create the illusion of perspective, and that you are going back into the painting based on the tonal values that you've created. And a lot of the key to this is, like I said, mixing on your palette first before applying that paint onto your canvas or your canvas panel. Adding a little bit more yellow to that mixture and a little bit ultramarine blue. And what I'm doing now is I'm darkening that green mass. I'm making a new green mass puddle right next to the other one, so that way I can judge the colors. And sorry I didn't hold up that palette long enough or high enough for you to see me mixing this, but you will see it as I apply it here. And I'll come back and I'll smooth that up a little bit so that there's not a strong line in between those two greens, but more of a gradation of the color. By varying the stroke and the amount of force that you put down, you can also get this effect. Notice that the color temperature has changed, is becoming a little warmer, as well as what we might consider darker in comparison to the other greens. And that's simply because you just saw there's more ultramarine blue, but also yellow, the primary yellow light, and a little bit of Madder Lake, the red that we're using today. Now I'm just going into this shape here, which will become a clump of foliage of some kind. Not quite sure what yet. And hopefully already you can notice that I'm keeping the eye in the center of the painting by these large or somewhat small darker purples from the sketch, which are going to be my clumps of trees in this larger mass of green. Now here I begin to also lay in a little bit darker green in comparison to the hills behind it. Varying my strokes a little bit to suggest some contours in the lines in the field. Notice too that it's best to pull the brush through the color. If you do this, you will allow your brushes to last a lot longer, because you won't be forcing the bristles apart by pushing it into the canvas, but rather as you pull through, you keep the brush's shape, and therefore your brushes will last longer. Although I do know artists that do like to push the paint more, and they just they deal with the fact that they're going to replace their brushes in a quicker amount of time. So right now you see there's already 3 varieties of this green. And notice that they're very subtle shifts. Oftentimes, beginner painters especially try to exaggerate those shifts too much, and then I think the effect comes across as not as appealing. Here I'm creating a darker green, of course, with all 3 of the primaries, and a little bit more red and yellow in this mixture. And see how that looks. Once again, we can't really tell until we get that compared to the other colors that are already down, but obviously that this green is much more, it's a lot warmer than the other greens that we put down, and you should be able to see that temperature difference, and that helps us to create this new tonal value. And this is going to cover, I'm going to cover the rest of this painting with this color, and then we'll go back in and we can make our adjustments. And this is part of that second key, that as we're laying in these tonal values, which are very important, that we cover the canvas as quickly as possible, especially if you happen to painting outdoors. The light's always changing. You only have about 2 hours to really compose and finish a painting in the outdoors without the light significantly changing on you. So you do have to work quickly. And once you're able to completely cover the canvas with that first pass of color and your composition, then it becomes much easier to look at the relationships between the color and make your adjustments accordingly. See how as we made our way forward, now that foreground really does present closer to us in comparison to the background colors. Now we're going to concentrate on the verticals. The verticals are always going to be darker than the horizontals. And in this case, we're dealing with just foliage and trees. So now I'm going to produce, and I've left enough room because I've judged the mixtures enough. I've left enough room to get a really dark green. Adding a little bit more blue and a little bit more red to the mixture. And now these should stand out some. There are various ways to do foliage and trees. Today I'm just taking little pieces of paint and sticking them on there to where the underpainting is still showing through. I'll leave some of the darker purples uncovered, but for the most part I'm covering everything up with this dark green. And if you vary your strokes, look how convincing that looks. Your eye begins to form different shapes for you. And I'm also trying to be conscious of making sure that this shape is not exactly like the other shapes that I'll be making on this canvas today. So we could say that key number 3 is continuing to produce random shapes. You want to work really hard not to repeat the same stroke over and over and over again. But just by varying the direction, the pressure, changing up a little bit of the mixture of green, all of that adds variety to the painting. And variety provides interest for your viewer. So the third key is making sure that you're not repeating patterns or shapes, that you're varying your strokes and your colors ever so slightly to provide more interest. Here I'm just darkening that mixture just a little bit, adding some more color as I was running out. And these 3 masses are certainly in the foreground area. And so now for the additional groupings of trees and such that I have in the background, we will lighten up that mixture of greens slightly so that you can tell a difference. And so instead of putting titanium white in there, we're going to lighten it up with yellow, the primary yellow light. Otherwise, the titanium would make these masses way too cold back there. Especially for this nice green day. And so now just varying the strokes, and I'm providing a little bit more texture by putting in a little bit thicker paint now that we have arrived at the second layer. We've already put paint over the entire canvas, and now we're putting more paint on top. And so the fourth key to painting is remembering the thick over lean rule, which basically states that, especially if we were doing this over a sequence of several days instead of an all one sitting, as you put subsequent paint layers on a painting, you need to put thicker paint over top in order for that color to stick and to keep its shape. Otherwise, you begin to lose the spontaneity of the passage. There, I'm almost just tapping that color on there to produce some interesting shapes, hopefully. So notice how the eye takes, which is nothing more than a few little brush strokes, and begins to see those as a line of trees. And hopefully you notice the circle that's forming sort of in the middle, such that your eyes are going in a circular motion to see these different tree groupings. That composition, by the way, is one of the most frequently used in landscape painting. So now I got the main masses in, believe it or not. And now I'm going to produce a highlight color to come back in and provide a little bit more variety in some of the masses to begin working on the internal shapes of these trees or bushes and such. First, I'm going to soften a little bit of the lines on this distant hill by suggesting some farther trees with a mixture of just a little bit darker green than what is already on the fields, but not by much. And I'll do the same on the right side of the landmass as well. Here I'm taking a little bit of a paper towel and varying that landscape just a tad by lifting off a little bit of that green. Did you see? Hopefully you can see that on your screen that there is definitely a different color going on, and what's happening is I'm revealing a little bit more of that underpainting, which shines through and really makes a nice little bit of relief there for the eye. And same way with this other distant hill, softening that edge. Because obviously if it sits back that far, you want your edge to kind of disappear. If you squint, when you see your landscape form, that will make some sense to you. Because you're only painting the detail. Once again, making a little bit lighter mixture, which will become a highlight color on the tree masses. And I'm putting in some more of that quick dry medium. So here's where we go back in now. We're going to start working on inside these bigger groupings with the shapes. But here, I've just decided that I'm going to plop some of those colors onto those back tree groupings. So that way I know that I can go darker than this for the foreground trees. And it helps me to figure out, well, how light do they have to be? By the way, at this point in the video, if you're enjoying the content, I do hope that you will remember to subscribe to the channel. Just getting started with this new channel, so I plan on having many videos to come. And give a thumb up if you cared for the content, and by all means add a comment or two if you got a question about something, or if you got some ideas about what other videos you'd like to see on this channel. Please let me know in the comment section. At this point, I think we've got about 20 other videos that you can watch. And other ideas and other shows are in the works. So here you can definitely see that I'm lightening up some of these groupings up front. Trying to produce some variety in these shapes, as well as add some sunlight to it. We'll continue to build up some of our colors as we progress through this painting. I do vary the brushes that I use too. That helps with some of the variety. These are 8, 6, and 4 are the 3 hog bristle brushes I use. They're all flats. And then I use 2 rounds for some detail work, a 2 and a 4. I've got a couple of fan brushes, but I didn't use them on this painting. A palette knife, and then a liner or a rigger. The liner is a synthetic, by the way. It's the only synthetic I've got in this grouping of paintbrushes at the time, and that comes from the Princeton Aspen line. The others come from the Princeton, I believe it's the Ashley line, which is a pretty economical line of paintbrushes. And for me, I've found that they work just fine. Some have asked me, do you find a difference? I used to use, as many of you have watched some of the other videos know, Gamblin's 1980, which is actually a student grade paint, but I found that it's fairly well pigmented enough for me. But I have not noticed any real difference between water mixable oils and the color on the canvas or anything with moving to the water mixables. The cleanup is a little simpler in the sense that you're just cleaning up with water. I wouldn't recommend cleaning up with much soap, maybe once in a great while, but that usually diminishes the lifespan of your brushes when you introduce soap in the cleaning process. But I just wipe it off as best I can with the paper towel, and then use the water. And this also makes it even safer and nicer in the studio. I don't have to worry about any fumes, even if I can't smell the fumes. If it's a kind of a non-smelling mineral spirits like Gamsol, which that's what I used prior to just going to water mixable oils. Here I'm just introducing a light brown color, which was produced by mixing together the three primaries and then adding a little bit of titanium white. And once again, I'm just introducing this so that I'm guiding the viewer's eyes to take a look at this kind of what I call a circle composition, in which they're kind of getting inside to the major tree grouping that's on the right side of the painting, and then they head up in a circle form, and then all the way back around to the larger grouping that's on the left side of the panel. And they'll become even more pronounced as I introduce some tree branches and a few other colors in the foreground here in a few minutes. One thing I should make note, I'm not particularly into realism, so if you are coming here to paint realism, please understand that I'm not that interested in painting what I would consider to be high realism even. I would probably use terms like expressionist. I'm more about emotion and my encounter with nature and trying to represent that on the painting. And also a little bit more impressionistic, I guess. And it varies. There are some paintings I do that look very abstract, more contemporary, and others which are much closer to realism. And I think it's important as a painter to experiment, try different styles, and don't feel that every painting has to be the same. Especially if you're starting out, you have to find your artistic voice, and so copy some of the, not copy their paintings directly, but copy the style of the painters that you like the most, and then see what works for you. And over time, you will discover your own natural painting style. I can't say that I've actually found mine yet. That's one reason I wanted to begin doing these videos, is that it's a way for me to kind of record my own progress in my painting career. I haven't been painting all that long. As many of you already know, I didn't start until I was almost 50 years old. And that's another reason to do it, is to try to inspire others that no matter what age you are, you're not too young, you're not too old to start. I find painting very relaxing. Frustrating at times, of course, but very relaxing, just enjoying the process. And once you learn a little bit, it becomes a lot easier. And the more you paint, the easier it does get. And certainly I think that usually most of my paintings now turn out a lot better than they used to. Of course, even among the best artists, you need to realize that they will tell you not every painting is going to be particularly good. Sometimes they have their favorites, as we all do. I have mine. And as some of the pro painters I've experienced will say, they'll tell you, this wasn't one of my stellar masterpieces. But that's probably not something you need to tell someone if you're trying to sell them a painting, right? So, and it's art's in the eye of the beholder as much as it is the creator. So just because a particular painting might not be your favorite after you've painted it, keep that in mind, that don't feel too discouraged, because there may very well be someone who views that painting and thinks it is one of your best. So here with the liner, this is once again a dark mixture of the ultramarine blue and the madder lake. And then I'm using the liner and putting more pressure down at the base of where the trees are, rooted into the ground, and then lightening it. And some of that occurs naturally as the paint goes off of the brush up into the sky space. And it takes more than just a couple of strokes to suggest a tree. Trees have tons and tons of branches, so keep that in mind. And notice that they don't all just go upwards either. They go across a tree, sideways. So want to get a few strokes in that suggests that kind of natural movement. And notice that it doesn't take much, and automatically your eye reads it like that. So the fifth key would be that you need a little bit of detail, but not much. And see, on the other side of the painting, I need a few highlights there to keep the viewer inside that O pattern composition, but not a whole lot. So I'm just varying a few brush strokes to get some of that brush in for your eyes to read that as maybe some young trees or ferns or some kind of bush growing over there. And now I'm taking, there was a few blobs that just were standing out a little bit too much. And so I'm taking that liner and just kind of deadening that effect a little bit so that they don't stand out quite as much. So clearly this fifth one is the focal point. And so this bigger branch, these bigger trees over on the right, that is the focal point of the painting. And so I'm going to make sure that that's where the highlights are and the contrast is the greatest. That's key number 5 to a good painting, is it should have a focal point, I believe. Or most of the good paintings, I think, have a central focal point, even though if there may be other areas of interest in the painting that the creator wants you to continue to take a look at. There's usually one focal point that stands out above the others. And I'm going to do that today by adding a little bit more color. Although I must say, as I look back and I think about what I was thinking, each decision you make, of course, transforms your painting. I could have stopped right here, and I think it would have been a fine painting. But I do think that adding a little bit more color will take it away from just being okay to maybe a little bit more visually stimulating and exciting. You let me know what you think of the decision I make here. I'm making an orange, orangish red, dark color here. And that's the first one I'm going to do. And I'm using a round. I think it's a number 2 round. And I'm going to be very careful. I'm just trying to introduce just a few strokes suggesting leaves. Now, if we were doing some kind of super ultra realistic work, I've seen those artists that paint like every single leaf. Well, we're not going to do that, but we are going to do enough to suggest that these are individual leaves, and that way the brain will read some of the other color strokes as if they are a batch of leaves here and there. So notice too how our eye is now being drawn over to this focal point. And so at this point I really do think that I made the right choice in adding these leaves, because it's this orangish red also, your eyes thrive it because of the green. Create some color vibration and relief when you set that against the greens. I'm suggesting a few leaves at the very top of some of these little branches that we can barely see. Always difficult to know when to stop as you introduce a few of these highlights, if you will, on the focal point. You want enough, but you don't want to overwhelm it either. It can quickly become out of hand if you're not careful, and then you can obliterate all the other things that you had put down earlier. Now I'm also noticing, because I'm putting those colors over there, that we need a few of those colors over on the left side as well to provide a little bit of balance. And there we go. So I'm going to put in just a few little spots of color over there in this section of foliage. It's always good to take a step back and to compare. Well, I hope I've given you 5 keys to landscape painting at this point. It's kind of arbitrary, isn't it? 5, 6, 3. How many points do you put? But in all seriousness, I hope that I provide at least 5 keys that might assist you in thinking about your painting process. This is a dark, kind of a golden yellow, was what I was working at on the palette there with my round, and now I'm going to introduce some of that color in here. And once again, that helps, I think, to intensify the orange, while also serving to clearly signal to the viewer that this is the focal point. Look here, look at this tree grouping as you take in the vista view rather. And notice how I'm kind of picking out a few of the oranges and then sticking the yellow right next to it or on top of it, trying to suggest groupings of some leaves and such. And I'll need just a couple over on the other side as well, like we mentioned. That produces a little bit of balance so that so it doesn't seem so weird or out of place to see this color throughout the painting. So I'm relatively happy with how this is turning out. As I look at the little path that I had produced there kind of near the center of the painting, I'm deciding to put some fence posts in. Fence posts are a common feature that you find in landscapes, so if you've wondered how to achieve that, I'm going to show you an additional information on creating that effect here. I start off with a mixture of burnt umber. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself in this. This is another version of a yellow to suggest the sun kind of flickering with just little bitty points of light. And so I go back into the duller yellow, and I'm just adding a few little bitty touches where the light's kind of shimmering off of these leaves, which makes sense if it's the focal point, right? That the sun might be catching a few of these, drawing our attention to it. Once again, always the danger Need some, but not tons and tons and tons. There we go, softening it a little bit. And just taking this and blotting a little bit to pick up a little bit of that excess of paint on there. To smudge it a little bit, if you will, so that it doesn't, so it looks a little bit more random without taking away too much of the color. So I think that was effective, and that's a nice use with a paper towel, that if you just lightly press it onto the panel, you can get some interesting effects from time to time and soften the color if you need to. So now I'm creating a dark mixture again. This is a little bit of a red, because there's so much green here that a little bit of red can help that green stand out more. So that's what I'm doing now, is just adding a few little touches of red. Not much, and it's not really noticeable too much on the video. And I do believe now I get into the fence post that I'm going to create here. Which also sort of helps with the O composition, keeping everything kind of in a circular motion as you go through the path, and envision yourself going past the focal point, back into the distance, and then up and over and around. Mixing on the palette once again. And now I'm going to lay those fence posts in. At least I think that's where we're at. Oh no, I forgot the white tree. Putting the key focal point is a little white dead tree that's in the middle of this. And so that really does add some interest over on that section. And I'm going to soften that tree, those couple of tree branches a little bit, so that they're not, there we go, I'm going to make sure it looks like it's growing into the ground. And if you notice, there's even a little bit of shade on the one side of that stroke by just taking it through the other colors. There we go. I think that works fairly well. It could have also worked just with the darker trees, but you'll have to let me know in the comments. Do you like the white dead tree branches here in the midst of that, or would you have rather me left them out? And why I mention that is that in the painting process, that's what you're constantly asking yourself. That, at least that's what's going through my mind as I paint. Okay, do I add this or do I not? Would this be a good move or not? Is this going to help the composition or take away from the composition? Because once you make it one choice, you've kind of committed yourself to a bunch of other choices after that. Now, certainly you can always take your palette knife and scrape certain sections of the painting off, but you don't want to do that too often. And certainly not with a tree that's basically taking up a large section. I would have, if I had to scrape that off, I would have had to go back in and basically do sections of the sky over and the distance in the foreground. It would have been a big Herculean process to try to do that over. All right, here's the fence post. So just a round and going down there. This is pretty much burnt umber straight from the tube there on these. And as we go back, those get smaller and smaller. And now I'm going to, after I get that in like I wanted to, I'm going to go back in with a little bit lighter brown, adding some titanium white to indicate the side where the sun's shining on it. So there we go. And doing that on each of them. There we go. And across the top of the each of the pole, there would be a little bit of sunlight. And on that farthest away, you'd see it a little bit, perhaps. And then we're going to, one more there. Then we're going to connect them using the liner. The liner produces little bitty lines, so we're going to suggest that that is indeed a fence post by putting in a couple of details there. And see how that little path then leads you into the painting there, kind of to stop and glare at the focal point before moving on down the hill, up the hill again to see these other tree arrangements and in this what I'm calling a circle pattern, because I'm keeping your attention all in the middle of this painting today. So here we go. It's just a mixture of ultramarine blue and madder lake, and then just a couple of strokes there, and just kind of making sure that they're abstract, but that you can still kind of see them clearly, that there's some kind of wire connecting these things, that it's not some kind of natural occurring or chopped down tree that you see, but rather an actual fence post. And then of course it's going back down and around, so we don't see where it comes out at or anything like that. And now I'm going to kind of evaluate if it looks good enough. And I was pretty pleased with this, at least with the painting process. Sometimes it actually takes me longer to figure out if it's a good painting or not, because sometimes if you have such an enjoyable process of painting, it's hard to know whether the painting itself is good or just that you enjoyed the process of it. And so I'm putting some tree branches, another kind of dead tree, if you will, over here on this side to also keep the viewer from going off of the painting. So, and then of course you start with some pressure at the very base of the tree and let up as you pull up with this liner brush, which makes it so easy to create branches. And I think I'm just about done, and now I'm going to get a rubber tool. It's made primarily for taking paint off of a canvas, but I use it so that way I can easily mark into the paint and sign my paintings. So oftentimes, since we're English speakers, we read from right to left, and so usually you'll sign your paintings on the left to right. I said the exact opposite. Oh, getting tired today. But I'll sign the painting on the right. Unless there's so much going on the right side of the painting, then sometimes I will sign on the left as a way to provide it with a little bit more balance. Here I'm just getting up and stepping away so that I can see if indeed I'm good with this painting. Again, Thank you so much for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you will, and I'll see you in the next video to come. Thank you so much for watching once more.